Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Lisa Mendez, Director of Programs for the Miami Book Fair, and I am filling in this evening for our partners at Books and Books, our independent booksellers in Miami. It's my honor to host tonight. Before we get started, I do want to extend our gratitude to tonight's partners, our book selling friends, at Harvard Bookstore and Politics and Prose. Um, Remember, if you've yet to do so, please purchase our featured authors' books from your local independent bookshop. If that happens to be Books and Books, there's a link right on your screen. We will have a Q&A period during tonight's program. Please note that there's an ask a question field right at the bottom of the screen. So you want to write your questions in there for our authors. And about our authors, Maggie Shipstead, whose newest book we are celebrating tonight, has won a Booker Prize, among other recognitions. You Have a Friend in 10A, her first book of short stories, comes after three acclaimed best selling novels. The New York Times has already raved, calling You Have a Friend in 10A extraordinary. We welcome Maggie tonight, as well as fellow writer Elin Hilderbrand, the best selling, award winning author of 28 novels. Her newest is out next month and is titled The Hotel Nantucket. Thank you both for being with us today. And I will bring you up on screen right now. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Lisa.
And hi, Ellen.
Hi.
Hi.
Ooh,
Wow.
I think Ellen was just having a little bit of feedback on her mic.
Should
How's
I
that?
should I get my
You might need headphones, maybe.
You're going to get your headphones. Perfect. Well, so here we are in the meantime while we wait for Ellen. Thank you so much. So you were mentioning that the official pub date of the book is tomorrow.
That's right. Yep. Tomorrow, after all this time, it's really snuck up on me. Yeah, I'm sure Ellen and I will talk about this as well, but the earliest story in it I wrote in 2008 when I was in graduate school, and the most recent one was in 2017. So it's kind of been a long time coming.
Well, you anticipated my question, the question I was going to drop in the ask a question box, which is, have you been writing these for a long time? How's that going, Ellen?
guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yay.
perfect.
Yay.
Okay, then I can move off screen and I'll see you all at the end. Again, Ellen, there's a ask a question box at the bottom. So if you want to take questions from the audience, you could do that, or you could just call on me and I'll come in and help you guys out at the end there when the Q&A starts.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Alrighty. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Ellen.
It is
Thanks
so
so much
nice
for doing
to
this.
meet you. Oh my gosh, my enormous pleasure. So nice to meet you in person. I have been a huge fan of your work. I've read everything. Um, I think Astonish Me was really where I got hooked. I consider that a perfect book. I
Oh, thank
absolutely love
you.
that book. And of course, Great Circle last year. And You Have a Friend in 10A. I don't read a lot of short stories anymore, really, because I OD'd on them at Iowa, which we will definitely talk about.
Hmm.
But I so enjoyed this collection.
Oh, thank you.
So I didn't quite hear what you were talking to Lizette about how this collection came to be.
Yeah, these are really just the product of kind of a long time of sort of learning to be a writer. I always felt short stories aren't really a natural form for me. I think I'm much more of a novelist. But for me at Iowa, and then when I was at Stanford for 2 years after that, it was really useful. Writing short stories was a really useful way to sort of be able to present a beginning, middle, and end to a group of people and get feedback on it and work on it without it being a multi-year commitment.
Right.
So I was saying to Lizette that the earliest story in here is the Cowboy Tango, which I wrote at Iowa my second year, which was in 2000. I guess it was 2007. I said 2008, but I think it's 2007. And then the most recent one was Acknowledgements, which was 2017. And then some were from Stanford, and then others I sort of wrote along the way. So a real hodgepodge.
Yeah. So much to talk about. So let's start by talking about Iowa. I was there 10 years before you. I was there 96 to 98. I hated it. I've been very public about that. I did not like Iowa City. I did not like the program. I thought it was competitive. I thought it was cutthroat. I found it unnurturing. I had great professors. Ethan Kanan was there when I was there.
Yeah, I had him too.
He's so wonderful. Oh my gosh. So let's talk about your experience there.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag, and my 2 years were really different from each other. I had 1 year. How old were you when you went? Was it close to college or
27?
Yeah, I was 23 when I got there, I guess, so similar. I think I was still a little bit in college mode of like, oh, I have a story due, I'll stay up all night the night before and write it. It's one of those things where if I could go back in time and do it over again, I would take more advantage, which I feel the same way about my undergraduate time in a way. Yeah, I had like a really bad breakup right before I arrived. So my first year, I never went out. I was really isolated. I had a dog that I got there, and I would walk my dog with like my one friend in the big park. And then my second year, I was just out all the time. And it was like, my memories of it are of it being dark and freezing and me probably being full of PBR. And I had these guy friends, and we spent a lot of time playing Big Buck Hunter, that electronic, hunting video game. Like it was a weird time. I didn't hate it. But I didn't really, before I went there, I didn't really think I could be a writer. I kind of went because I got in and I didn't know what else to do. So it was very helpful for me in a lot of ways, just in terms of sort of figuring out how to write a little bit and thinking it was more viable to be a writer. But yeah, socially it was hard. And it's strange because I don't know, you were saying, you found it competitive and cutthroat, but it's also abstract. It's like everybody's competing about some theoretical career that they don't have yet. And so these little things get magnified to this huge, they seem huge, but it's like, was my story in a little journal or something like that? And it's really hard to maintain perspective there, I think.
Right. I mean, one of the things we were competitive about was like how we fared in workshop. So some stories fared very well and mine never did. And it was very discouraging. But I will say, I mean, Iowa is 100% responsible for the writer I am. The reading, I don't know, the inspiration, the work ethic, being surrounded by so many smart people. I mean, I really found it helpful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the stories. My favorite story, it was hard to choose. It was not Angel List. Angel List was very funny though. It was La Moretta.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I also have done a ton of traveling. I've been on 6 continents. I have not been on 7 continents like you have, but I have been extensively in 6 continents. So, and I really felt like the underpinnings of your world exploration in this collection, which I loved. And I also really loved, and I love the way you write about Los Angeles. Fantastic. But let's talk about La Moretta. Where did you get the idea for that story? And can you give us a little synopsis?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, since the book comes out tomorrow, I'm going on the assumption most people haven't read any of the stories. But yeah, La Moretta is a story. It's set in the 70s in Romania, and it's a couple on their honeymoon, kind of discovering in the process of their honeymoon that they don't like each other and have made a mistake. And there's sort of these interstitial sections that are a sort of unknown voice interrogating the man and the couple. And it doesn't ever really become clear who the voice is, but something sort of catastrophic happens at the end of the story that connects to the interrogation.
Yeah.
So the sort of core plot of the story, the catastrophic thing that happens at the end, which I don't really want to give away, was my cousin. I have cousins who live in Prague, and one of them told me that story had happened to sort of a friend of a friend, this horrible thing. And so sometimes, you hear that little kernel of plot, and you're like, oh God, it's perfect. I have to use it. And then I wrote this story when I was in workshop at Stanford as a Stegner Fellow. And I feel like during that time, my brain was in sort of this quiet space where I would sometimes just get these structural ideas, like the idea to insert the sort of interstitial interrogation, which changes the whole nature of the story and really opened it up for me. But at the time I hadn't been to Romania, and I have now. Some of these stories, it's funny, they sort of play into great circle. Like when I wrote Cowboy Tango, which is set in Montana, I'd never been to Montana. And then I spent time in Montana, and then a big chunk of great circle is set there. And,
Right.
But this one, yeah, I kind of had to find the place through research. But I was always interested in stories as sort of opportunities to try things and experiment. And La Marta is definitely one of those.
I love the game they play.
Oh, yeah.
So brilliant. I can't say anything else. I mean, it's difficult. That La Moretta, you guys, it was so, so brilliant. I loved all of these books. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, we're going to talk about acknowledgments because, of course, the other thing I really love are books about writers. And this guy, dude, where did the idea from that story come from?
Yeah, so acknowledgments, I'll say too, it's really funny. Like there've been, I don't know, 4 or 5 reviews of the collection so far, and the critics are always really sure which are the best stories and which are the weakest and say so. And some of them have been completely flipped. They'll be like, Suturan's obviously the best story, and it's like, Suturan's obviously the worst story. So it's been really interesting just to see sort of people's preferences play out. Acknowledgments is the most recent story in there. I wrote it in 2017, and I'd been teaching in an MFA program for a semester, which probably makes sense for those who haven't read. It's a first-person story in the voice of a young male writer whose first novel is coming out, and he's sort of reflecting on his time in his MFA, in which he did something really terrible, which was write an explicit sex scene in a short story about a woman who'd rejected him, and then workshop that sex scene or workshop that story. So in front of her, which is something that happens. I've heard more than one person say something similar has happened to them, but it was kind of this cathartic story for me to write in this voice, because both in workshops I'd been a student in and workshops I'd led, I often encounter this sort of faux lofty tone, that it never occurred to me to imitate until one day it did. And just writing in that voice, it just felt really good, because it's sort of, there's this seriousness to it and a little bit of pompousness. And often it sort of is taken more seriously than I think it deserves to be. So this is a little bit of a mean story.
Right. Well, I mean, I definitely took it as satire on the writing workshop, which is, I mean, so rich for satire. We're in there, thinking that we know what we talk about.
It's a really weird social experiment. Yeah. And there's so much incentive to say something just to say something.
Yeah.
And the fact that you sit there and listen in silence while people critique your work is very weird.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's found a better method for it, but yeah, when I look back at the way I behaved in workshop too, I'm not universally proud of it. I wasn't always super nice, but everything seems so important when you're in it, and it takes time to take a step back and be like, can just let some stuff go.
I know. Do you find that when you were teaching, you were kinder or more wise, or how would you say you differed than as a professor?
I was definitely kinder when teaching. I mean, I think you have to be. I don't like to teach. I don't do it full, except like occasionally in sort of one-off contexts. I find on the one hand, I don't really care if anyone else writes. Like, write, don't write. It's up to you. You know, whatever, do it. And so I don't feel like I want to be deeply invested in other people's sort of process of learning to write. It's for them to do. But then when I actually do it, I do become very invested and I worry about everybody's feelings and I want their dreams to come true. And you're sort of torn between, what's the best way to help this person improve? And it's different for everyone. So I have a lot of admiration for people who are excellent teachers and can really, tailor their teaching to the individual student. For me, it's really hard.
Right. No, I know. I mean, I've done it too. I taught at Iowa my second year.
Yeah.
I was a teaching and writing fellow and I had to teach these undergrads and everything's so bad. But you don't want to say that.
Well, they don't really necessarily care. I taught my second year too. And it's like, I was also like 3 years older than them and sometimes younger than them. And, they're kind of, some people take the class because they think it'll be easy. So they don't care at all. And that's fine, but hard to work with. And other people really care. It's just, it's really hard.
Hard to do. Okay, wait. So I wanted to get to one of the questions, which was regarding acknowledgments. Are you a Lori Moore fan? Someone asks. Yes. I am a huge Lori Moore fan. Huge.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. In acknowledgments during the sort of flashbacks to the MFA scenes, there's this bar, much like the Fox had in Iowa City, which was like, as Elin well knows, I'm sure, the writer's bar that was kind of a double wide trailer. And while I was there, you could still smoke in it. And so it was just like the smokiest, booziest place you've ever been. I went back a few years later after they'd banned smoking. It didn't smell better. It was like the smoke had been covering a lot. Anyway, so there's this scene in sort of a similar type bar in the story in which some of the male writers are sort of dumping on Lori Moore. And so part of the reason I chose her for them to do that was because I do really love her stories. And but she's sort of someone who you can see these pretentious guys who have no idea how hard it is to be Lori Moore, sort of deciding to dismiss.
Exactly. It was very funny. When I was at Iowa, they asked us who we wanted to have come read. This must have been my second year. And overwhelmingly, we all said we wanted Lori Moore to come read.
Oh, yeah? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
She's
amazing.
Some of my favorite short stories I got off the New Yorker Fiction podcast where other writers read them out loud. I think stories really benefit from being read out loud. And so one of hers that I love is called Paper Losses. It's on the New Yorker Fiction podcast. And I think sometimes when I was writing, I would just go on a hike and listen to it for the 10th time and love it.
Yeah. I love Terrific Mother. Where she drops the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else we want to talk about? Let's talk about the title story. So good. You have a friend in 10A. You write so well about Los Angeles. I know you live there, you grew up there. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with LA?
Sure.
Vis-a-vis your work?
Yeah, so I grew up in Orange County, so south of LA. And we never really came here much when I was growing up, just very rarely. And so when I was this was another story I wrote at Stanford, so it would have been in 2009 to 2011, somewhere in that range. And I'd been spending more time in LA because I had friends from college who all settled here. And I've now lived here for 7.5 years. And it was right when Lawrence Wright's sort of first long excerpt from his book about Scientology was in the New Yorker. Yeah. And at the time at Stanford, when I was just having to produce more short stories, I think we had 3 sort of quarters a year and you sort of went up twice. So you had to turn in 6 things a year. So I was always looking for inspiration very actively. And so I read that excerpt and I was really intrigued by the sort of language and lexicon of Scientology and these sort of made up terms, and I liked the idea. So You Have a Friend in 10A, for those who haven't read, which is everyone. It's sort of a riff on Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, and it's in the first person point of view of a young movie star who sort of left her famous husband, who's in this cult that's not Scientology but sort of styled similarly. And I thought there's something interesting about starting a story from this sort of celebrity anecdote that most people would be familiar with. I talked to Curtis Sittenfeld about this once in an event, and she was like, yeah, when I'm writing about a famous figure, I feel like I'm with the reader, I'm gossiping about someone we both know, as opposed to telling a story from scratch. And so I liked that in some ways, some of the work was already done for me when I started writing this story. And it was a way to explore celebrity culture in LA. And in some ways, it became sort of the basis for Hadley in Great Circle, the movie star character in Great Circle. And there's actually sort of an Easter egg, because both the character in You Have a Friend in 10A and Hadley go to the same shrink, because they've both been told to imagine a glowing tiger that's eating their insecurities, which I think was a real thing in a different New Yorker piece I read. I think there's a real Hollywood shrink who would tell people that. So it was working in that really intense first person voice that kind of set me up to write Hadley and keep writing about LA too.
Yeah, I love, it feels like, I felt that during Great Circle, it feels like you were a child star, or you're a celebrity. You do it so well. You know all the ins and outs. And I'm thinking, how does Maggie know all this? This is amazing. And then the historical story, which I'm going to mangle the title. It is The Great Central Pacific Guano Company. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's set in an atoll in the middle of the Pacific. And I know you've done a lot of travel in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah, I think this one also probably predates my first South Pacific stuff. I guess I was writing stories about places I wanted to go.
I guess so.
But I had a book, I'm looking on my shelf to see if it's up here. I think it's downstairs, called The Atlas of Remote Islands That I Have Never Been to and Will Never Go to. And it's really beautiful. It's really this slender little hardback, and each page is a map of some speck of land, so most of them are pretty basic maps. And then there's some facing page account of something that happened there, something that makes the island interesting. And so this was also based on a real historical event. In sort of the 19th century, there was kind of a gold rush on some of these atolls for guano, so bird poop, that was used in fertilizer and I think munitions. And so it's very valuable. And this one island was sort of unclear who actually possessed it, whether it was France or the US or whatever. And something happened. In the story, what happens is that a war breaks out, and so they stop getting their supplies. And it's a mining company that's French, and then there's also this random American guy who's also mining. And so the women are kind of eventually left behind, and everyone has scurvy, and it's horrible, and they fall under the thrall of this American guano miner. And it was based on a historical event, and I thought it was, just a fascinating setup for how power plays out, even when this guy is outnumbered by all these women, but they're so conditioned to sort of respect male authority. And they're so vulnerable and sickly and have all these children and are in this incredibly isolated place. And I still think all the atolls I've been to, I find like a little spooky, on the surface, they look like paradise. It's palm trees and white sand, but it's just barely breaching the surface of this huge oceans, these huge, rings of sand and trees. And I find them a little bit eerie all the time.
Right. Should we segue a little bit, Maggie? Can you talk about, you've done a fair amount of exotic travel, even recently. What has that been like? And I do want to talk about Antarctica, but let's start with the Central Pacific.
Sure. Yeah. Well, just kind of, I didn't travel much for the first couple of years of the pandemic. I write for travel magazines kind of on the side. I started doing that in 2015 when I was drafting Great Circle. And part of it was so I could pitch places I wanted to go that were in Great Circle.
Right.
It felt important to me to go see those places. Obviously, it didn't so much for these stories. And so, yeah, I've been around the South Pacific. I've been to the Cook Islands. I've been to Tonga to swim with humpback whales, which was an assignment and amazing. I just went to Polynesia for the second time in February, where I got COVID on arrival. I had had a negative PCR test to get on my plane. And by the time I landed, I was positive. So I had to quarantine. Wow. I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks and go on a cruise, but it turned into a month because I took the next sailing of the cruise to the Marquesas Islands, which are about 1,000 miles from Tahiti, still in French Polynesia. And then I just got back from Fiji, also a magazine story. So I guess I'm in a little bit of a South Pacific kick, but there are worse things.
It has felt that way. And then how you did go to Antarctica, yes?
Yeah, I've been twice. Is that your missing continent?
Yes. I'm never going.
Really?
I will never. No.
Do you hate the cold?
Hate it.
Oh,
look at me.
Man, I don't know. It's worth it. You just bundle up.
Oh my God. My ex-husband went in January. And I'm like, this is why we're divorced. I would never go there. Never, ever. He had a great time, though.
Yeah, it's spectacular. I think you should just keep it as a maybe. But I will say, like, most of the travel I've done in the polar regions, I've encountered a lot of couples where one person is obsessed with the Arctic or Antarctic, and the other person's just sort of humoring them. It seems like a common pairing. So I've been twice. I went to the Ross Sea, which is south of New Zealand, in 2016, early 2016. And for those who are curious, I wrote a New York Times Modern Love about this. I was dating the expedition leader. It was essentially a 5-week-long first date. We barely knew each other and got on the ship and headed south. It's to go to the Ross Sea, you have to go really, really, really far south. So it's a lot of time at sea and really big seas. And then I went, and that's where a lot of the historical huts are. And it's a big ice shelf. So it's just floating ice, the size of France. It's a crazy, crazy place. And then I went in 2018, I think, for a magazine story from South America. So the way most people go, which is a much shorter trip. And I had a little bit of attitude about it because I was like, oh, it's so easy. It's just a day across the Drake Passage, but it was still spectacular and just stunning, landscape and wildlife. And love to go back.
And you were able to research, that scene, in my mind, the best scene in Great Circle is where the dude, and I can't remember his name, decides he's going to stay there.
Eddie. Yeah. For those of you who haven't read, just forget what she said. But I when I went, I think I was only halfway through the draft. So I hadn't made that decision, and I was pretty far from writing any of the Antarctic sequences. But in retrospect, I do think it was important that I went. I think it's just like such an alien, hostile place in a way. And the fact that it's just down there doing its thing. Even just the way you go on a ship, you see this tiny little edge of it, and the whole interior is just this vast, lifeless ice sheet. It just, I don't know, excites my imagination so much.
Oh my goodness. I'm in awe. Okay. Which of these stories is your personal favorite?
Oh gosh. Let me look. I think Souterrain is the one I'm kind of most proud of. It's definitely the most complex structurally, and that was one of the first stories I wrote when I was no longer in workshop. So it was I wasn't totally sure I could write stories and not get that kind of feedback. And I spent a long time sort of puzzling over it and bringing it together. But yeah, I think I'm also like La Moretta, and I like the LA stories a lot. I think just because I still think it's really fun to write about LA. Yeah. The Cowboy Tango, it's just been around. It's been a part of my life now for so long
Yeah.
that it's just reading it is a weird experience. It's just clearly to me the work of a younger person, and which it is, some 24-year-old. And I feel the same way in a bit about my first novel. Do you feel that way about your early books? Do you ever go back and read them?
I had to read my first novel before I wrote The Hotel Nantucket because I thought I was going to bring some people back. It was surprisingly good. I was really nervous. Like, this is going to suck. But it was okay. It was a completely new book to me. I mean, I had read it in 20 years. And I thought, what happens now? And then I was reading, I'm like, oh, yeah.
It's
but
amazing.
it's not as sophisticated,
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like I can't hold a whole novel in my brain, even when I'm working on it every day. Pieces of it just, like when I would read through the drafts of Great Circle, I'd be like, oh yeah, like I was always finding loose threads.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that your old ones sort of get relegated to the attic a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, but also Great Circle is a very complicated, multifaceted.
Oh my God. Oh, yeah, it was a nightmare. It was the worst.
I'm sure it was. I'm very, very proud of you for pulling it off. Okay, I want to get to some of these questions. We have 10 minutes left. Let's see what people are asking. Okay, wait. I don't know if I want to. Who's questioning Bill? We don't know the answer to that. Regarding acknowledgments, where is Michigan's bemittened middle finger? It's the UP, right? Or no?
No, it's like it would be sort of just at the top. Yeah, I don't think I had like a
town in mind.
Town in mind. Yeah.
And let's see this question. After writing these short stories one at a time over the years, what brought you to feel that you were ready to make a book out of them?
Well, there were enough of them. Actually,
right?
I think this is about a little more than half of my published short stories. So I had enough to choose from. Yeah, it was funny. I sold them with Great Circle to my publisher. And we'd been talking about doing a collection kind of from the beginning, I guess. Like, I didn't really have enough until maybe Astonish Me was out. And so then such a long time elapsed between Astonish Me and Great Circle that it was always like, oh, should we throw out a story collection? But because they are like fairly disparate stories, I know my agent's on this. She's going to be mad at me because she's always been like, you have to figure out how to talk about them as a whole. And I'm always like, but they're just, the product of time passing and different sort of rabbit holes of interest. So it just kind of became time, and it's been interesting sort of putting them out right after Great Circle. Like, I've just been talking about Great Circle for a solid year. It's never ended.
Yeah.
And suddenly talking about something different is really strange.
Well, I mean, the exciting thing for you and your agent is that I read Great Circle probably this very same week last year because I had an advance, and there were so many themes, like the travel and the LA and the star, like that continued in this volume, that I felt like it's a natural sort of, what is the word I'm looking for? The books belong together.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like fans of Great Circle will get a lot of the things that they loved about that book in this collection. That's my take.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you can see the roots of Great Circle in these stories, especially in Cowboy Tango and the Hollywood stories.
Yep.
And yeah, it's been, I don't know, it's the most low key like book publication I've ever had. And I'm wiped, from a year of Great Circle. I don't know how you do it. I see you on Instagram, especially interacting with people in person, which is now like this foreign thing. I've just done a handful of in-person events, and it's like, I mean, you have you must be, are you an actual extrovert?
No.
Really?
I don't like it. I don't. I can do it, but it's not. I would much prefer to be home reading.
Yeah, you don't gain energy from it.
Not really.
Interesting.
But
Yeah. So I guess then you're more like me. I was at a book festival once and did an event with another writer. And afterward, he was like, "How are you liking the festival?" I said, "Oh, it's great, but I always find it really exhausting because I was a really shy child. I still think of myself as a shy person." He was like, "No, you're a gregarious introvert. So you can turn it on, but you don't
yeah,
gain power from it." So,
yep,
yeah.
that would be me.
Hmm.
I want to ask about your reading life. What have you read in the last year? And then you obviously did an enormous amount of research for Great Circle, so you must read a lot of nonfiction. I'm really asking.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Just as a preference, I probably read almost equal nonfiction and fiction. It's actually nice. I mean, once I was done with Great Circle, that was one of the great reliefs of it, was
I
that I
bet.
no longer had to read, books about airplanes or
I bet.
Alaska or Antarctica. Yeah, I have to look at the list on my phone because as soon as I read something, it just goes out of my brain. I just read Jennifer Close's new book, Marrying the Ketchups, when I was in Fiji, which I loved.
Oh,
He's so
fun.
charming. I read a nonfiction book called The Cold Vanish by John Billman, who's an outside writer, and it's about like the weirdly huge number of people who go missing in wilderness areas in the US and kind
Oh,
of the ways they behave and how they're found, and really fascinating. I read Paul Theroux's book about the South Pacific while I was there. I reread The Idiot by Elif Batuman. I read Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. And then sort of a smattering of, I read a few travel memoirs when I had COVID and
oh
in
yeah.
French Polynesia for some reason. Like What I Was Doing While You Were Breeding by Kristen Newman was one. So yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I'm really like a pleasure directed reader, I think. And just like, I always have a stack of 10 different books that I'm making my way through. And I sometimes take pauses and come back and sometimes don't finish things. And yeah.
So you don't. Okay, so I'm not like that. I'm like a very disciplined, like one book at a time, finish it,
Really?
move
Mm-hmm.
on. Oh yeah. I'm super disciplined about my writing, but also about my reading because I'm just a nerd.
It's enviable. I don't know. I'm not that disciplined about either. Like when I'm really writing, I get in a groove and I'll work, most days. But if my time's broken up at all, I've just become such a spoiled wimp. I'm like, well, I have to go to the post office today. So like the whole day's shot. I can't possibly write.
I know. I mean, that's the thing about having children is that it taught me to focus in very small increments of time and
Mm-hmm.
during great distraction. I had no
Mm-hmm.
choice because I had
Mm-hmm.
deadlines and little tiny kids that I had to take care of. So I just taught myself to make it work.
Well,
Um,
I'm glad because your books have really seen me through some lonely times. Like when I was living on Nantucket in the winter when I wrote seating arrangements, I didn't know
yeah.
anybody. I read a bunch of your books and I was like, oh, this is Nantucket. And
Yeah.
then kind of deep pandemic, I listened to all the Virgin Island books on audio while I was taking these long walks around my parents' neighborhood, and it really kept me company.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Okay. I'm just so proud of you. Everyone, you have a friend in 10A. It's Maggie Shipstead. Maggie, are you working on another novel now?
Yeah, I am. It took me a few false starts. I had a couple ideas, and especially in like 2020, I don't know. I needed, something was off. I just couldn't work during kind of deep COVID. Probably because it was a really stressful, dark time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I finally kind of have settled on one, and I've written under 100 pages, but enough that I think it's viable. I think it's going to happen, but it's
Right.
also just, coming back to a blank page after spending 6 years where
Yep.
I at least had something, I was building on something, was a real shock.
Right. But also, don't you feel freedom? Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do something new?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and I am trying to keep the scope of it more narrow. It's more like a domestic story set in
Right.
LA. But I think now I just, everything wants to expand. And so I'm
Right.
always like fighting that and trying to rein it in. So,
Right.
you know,
Novel writing is hard. All writing is hard.
all writing's
But
really hard. Yeah.
I know novel writing is really hard because you have to have characters and you don't know who they are. You spent 6 years
Hmm.
writing a great circle, and the characters develop day by day, and spending time with them every single day. And I totally understand, as you get into your new novel, they want to take you out of
Yeah,
being prescribed.
it takes time, and a character is the product of 1,000 little tiny decisions that can
Yep.
go different ways. I think that's been sort of the struggle starting something new, is sort of feeling a little bit paralyzed by choice. It could be anything.
Yeah.
And then I go, oh, am I making the right choice?
Right.
And for some reason with Great Circle, I didn't have that as much. I had that paralysis about a couple technical questions along the way. I'd be like, oh, should this really be in third person? But the characters and the plot just sort of seem to build themselves. So I think every book too has its own set of struggles, and it's always sort of a rude awakening to be like, oh, it's still hard. It's just different hard every time.
No, I know. Okay, we have one last question. And that is, regarding acknowledgments, have you ever owned a red Selectric?
I have not. I'm an anti-typewriter person.
Yeah.
Some writers go through these little pretentious phases where they're writing on typewriter, and probably for valid reasons. No offense to those working on typewriters, but
Dude, I still write everything longhand.
Do you? I used to. I had to stop. I think most of Astonish Me and Seating Arrangements I wrote longhand, and then now it's too slow. Yeah.
All right. Well, Maggie, it was such a joy.
It's such a pleasure.
Everyone watching, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone who came. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks to the many bookstores hosting this.
Thank you so much to both of you. That was a super fun conversation. I really enjoyed being on the back end and listening, as I'm sure our many folks in their homes enjoyed as well. If you haven't bought your book yet, guys, your local independent bookstore is waiting for you. Tomorrow is the official drop date, but you can order online today and get your book in the mail. Thank you both, and I hope you all have a really good evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Wonderful.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Bye.